And we are recording, and I'm just going to introduce you. This is Laura Johnson. We are in one of the conference rooms in Building 60 at Rocky Flats. I'm Hannah Nordhaus. It's the 17th of October, and that's all. So, okay, let's just start with a little personal background. If you could tell me when and where you were born, and a little bit about your, growing up, your history, what your parents did, your jobs, places lived, that sort of thing.
Okay, I was born in Wheat Ridge, Colorado. I grew up in Golden, and I live in Arvada. So that means I'm a well-traveled person. And my father was an electrical lineman for, at the time, it was called Colorado Central Power Company, which later on they merged to the Public Service Company as we know it today. And my mother worked for the Jefferson County schools. I have two older sisters, and I started working at Rocky Flats on October 4th of 1965, which is more than half of my life. Wow. And I was hired by the Dow Chemical Company at the time. They were the prime contractor. And then in 1975, Rockwell, that's when Rockwell took over. And then later on in the late 80s, the EG&G people came in. In fact, I think it was January 1st of 1990 that EG&G came in. And then they left in 94, and then Kaiser Hill came in. So I've worked for all of these people over all these years. So it was really 38 years a couple of weeks ago that I've been here.
Wow.
Yeah.
And was this your first job?
This was my very first job. I have never worked anywhere else but Rocky Flats.
So how old were you?
It was 2 days after I turned 18. I graduated from high school when I was 17, and the government wouldn't let you be an employee on their land, facilities, unless you were 18. So it kind of worked out for me. I got that summer off. I knew I had this job, and I started in October of '65.
So you must have just had a birthday then.
Yes, I did. I did,
Birthday.
yes.
Okay, well, how did you first learn about Rocky Flats?
Well, my older sister ran around with this girl who worked here. And I just happened to be out with them one day, and she said, "You ought to really try Rocky Flats." Because she said it's a great place to work. She'd worked here for probably maybe 2 years. And I had all the skills for administrative type of work. And that's how it happened. I went and applied and took the tests, and they called and said they wanted me to come to work for them. But like I said, I had to be 18, and my first job was in the procurement organization, and we didn't work at the plant here. DOE had leased a building down in Wheat Ridge, and the facility engineers and employment, benefits and procurement were all in this leased building. And I only worked at that building for like maybe 9 months, and then they decided to move everybody back to the plant site.
So what did you know about Rocky Flats, about what they did out here?
Well, I grew up here, so I knew that it was a weapons production plant, but you didn't really know a lot about it in the very beginning. There wasn't a lot of newspaper articles, and they didn't talk about what they did out here. All we knew that it was classified.
And did you know it was nuclear weapons?
Yes, I did.
So you said it was administrative work. So,
yes. So what I did in procurement was I just worked for all of the buyers, mm-hmm. and did the requisitioning and purchase orders, things like that. And then I stayed in that organization for about 4 years, but then I bid on a job in the computer center, which was located in another building out here, and so I worked there as an administrative assistant also for about 2 years.
So the computers must have been...
It was like a new world. I mean, you know, and the computers were just really elementary. I mean, it wasn't like what we have today, that's for sure. We had these little printers that took forever to, you know, the dot matrix kind of printers, and it was, but it was neat. It was a new technology to all of us.
So this was the late 60s at this point?
This was in the late 60s, yes, it was.
So were the computers must have been huge?
They were huge, and they had to be in a certain conditioned room to keep them cool, and they had to have certain kind of floors for to keep them cool, and they were just huge. I mean, we had a big facility. It was an 881 building.
So huge is like size of a car, size of a...
Oh, it was probably as big as this room, and this is a big room.
One computer was as big as this room?
There were several computers in there.
Okay.
Yeah. Things weren't so compact back then.
No.
No.
And what did the computers do? Or did you know what they did?
Well, they did the payroll system, and they did a lot of, well, each organization had projects, and each organization had a programmer assigned to them for their project. So we did all sorts of things for all over the plant.
And so your job was sort of to keep everything flowing?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so from the computer center.
Okay, so from the computer center, I have to tell you, Hannah, I've worked in almost every building on this plant site, and so after 38 years, it's kind of hard to remember, you know, everything. But after 881, I went to work for industrial engineering. And what those people did was I worked for the manager of the industrial engineers. And each organization, just like the programmers, they were assigned one of our industrial engineers. And they had like an area of the plant that they had to cover for those people. And what they did was, this is just an example, say they made so many parts and they wanted to become more efficient at making them in less time, say. And so the industrial engineer would go and do time studies to see how they could improve their flow of production. So needless to say, some of the workers on the floor really didn't like industrial engineers very well because they were trying to speed up their work. So, and that was a fun job. I stayed there for about 4 years. And then Dow Chemical decided that they didn't want to rebid on this contract at that time. And so DOE, I think, solicited probably 6, 7, or 8 companies to bid on this contract. And I think it was the Atomic International Division of Rockwell was awarded that contract in 1975. And so they took over, I think it was July of 75. So we worked for a new company, new to all of us. And we were like a family out here. I think there was maybe 3,000 people. But everybody worked really well together, and we were like a family. And so to see our contractor, Dow Chemical, leave, it was kind of sad. But yet we didn't know what to think about Rockwell, because we really didn't know much about them, other than they did good things like make main engines for the space shuttle. How exciting is it? That's exciting. We had nothing to do with that, but we were going to become a part of that. And that was exciting times for them to come in and see what their management style was. And they were more, I think, in my mind, a more production type of a mindset rather than Dow Chemical. They were a little more people-oriented, I think, than Rockwell. But Rockwell was a good company. Nothing changed as far as like benefits, layoffs in the beginning. And so it turned out, in my mind, to be a good thing. Of course, we had the union at the time, and I'm not sure that Dow was the best union kind of company. And then I think Rockwell had dealt with it before and was a little more experienced in trying to make relations work between like management and the union. But I've never been a union employee. I've always been a salaried employee, so.
What was your perception of labor management relations over the years?
Yeah, well, in the beginning, it always seemed like it was us against them.
Us being management against them?
Yes, and it was uncomfortable to me because it seemed like they weren't working very well together in the beginning. But like I said, I didn't really get involved in that, you know. But when Rockwell came in, it seemed like the union management and Rockwell management seemed to talk more and get along better than before. And they got issues solved and that kind of thing. So I think it did get a little better when Rockwell came in. And we had a lot of, like when the strike, I think it was in the late 60s, 69, there was a strike. And I think it was in June, and they must have stayed out maybe 10 weeks. And those were exciting times. You had protesters at each gate, and as you drove through, they would, you know, yell names at you, you scab, and all that stuff. But the management really had to step up and cover all those jobs.
It must have been difficult given the specific specificity of the training, right?
Well, managers, if they managed any hourly employee, they were trained also. I mean, everybody was trained in that. They had to be trained because they had to know what the policies and procedures were for their people. So they had to go through training. It was mandatory. So they stepped up, and everybody kept going. And like my manager, he had to do a lot of different people's jobs, wear different hats, but they did it, and it was just exciting. Okay.
Okay, so we were in the Rockwell era, and you were describing, you said that they were more production-oriented, better with the union.
They were better with the union, and the Rockwell president always told the union president and his staff they were always welcome and in his office at any time. It was like an open door policy, which I thought was really good. It also was like their relations with the DOE people seemed to be better when Rockwell came in. It wasn't like, it just seemed like they were getting issues solved in a better way. And their relations with each other was more friendly than in the past. And I worked for, let's see, where was I? Where did I tell you I worked last?
Production engineering?
Industrial engineering, that's right. And then from there, where did I go? I went to, I need to stop for a minute.
Okay, let me stop it?
Yeah. just let me think.
Background.
Okay, after industrial engineering, I worked out of a pool at the time of employment. And what that was back then was that if people went on vacation or if someone got sick, I was in a pool where employment could put me in that job until that person came back. And that was really good for me because that's how I got to know so many people and work in so many buildings. And this was all administrative. Mm-hmm. I was never an hourly employee, so. But I worked in almost every building, got to know all the people, and it was just, I did that for like 6 or 7 years. And you really got to know a lot of people that way. And plus you got to know what each organization did too. So I became more well-rounded of what really went on. So that was a good job. And then from there, I worked for the president. And I worked for him for like almost 4 years.
And
this was like in the middle 80s.
Okay, and president, not Bob Nelson, who was the president then?
I worked for the president of Rockwell.
Oh, okay.
I did not work for the president of the Department of Energy.
Oh, okay.
So I worked for the Rockwell president.
And what was his name?
Dom Sanchini. And that's how I had good relations with the DOE because my office had to work with the DOE's office so much. Mm-hmm. And that was an exciting time for me out, because you got to really see and hear and know a lot mm-hmm. that other people didn't get to know because you were working for the main guy.
Right.
Yeah. And
did you have Q clearance for this stuff?
you had to have Q clearance, yes.
Do you have that from the very beginning, or?
Yes. And in fact, like way back when I was hired, everybody had a Q clearance.
Oh, okay.
I mean, and every job, let's see. Yeah, everybody had to have a Q clearance, and we didn't have like L clearances or that kind of thing. What we had was, if you were Q cleared, you had a green badge, which meant go. If you had a yellow badge, that meant that your clearance was partially completed, but it was a caution to the green badgers that could go. Mm-hmm. And then we had a red badge, which meant this clearance is just starting and this guy can't go anywhere without a green badge. Mm-hmm. So if you had a red badge, which I never had, I always had a Q clearance. But see, they had like, back then it usually took about only 3 months. Mm-hmm. Like now if you wanted one, it would probably take you a year. So that's changed.
Because the background check has become more intensive, or just because there's a backlog?
There's a backlog. Yeah, there's always been a backlog. But as the era that we're in now, they're taking all the clearances away. We don't need them anymore. I am an L, yes, now. But I have a feeling that I will probably lose this shortly.
And what is L? L is less than Q.
Yes, it's one step down. Mm-hmm.
And when did that happen?
Okay, when actually I worked in the laboratories and you had to have a Q, but they moved me from the laboratory on the floor to contracts where I am today, and I really didn't need a Q.
So this is after you worked for the president?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that's after I worked for the president.
Well, let me ask you, since we're talking about security badges and stuff, what was it like to work in such high security, and what was it, what it's like to go through the clearance process, and what was it like not to be able to discuss it with your family and friends, what you did, and how did you feel about it?
The security part of this was exciting to me from the very beginning. And my family did not have a problem with that whatsoever. And you couldn't really talk about it, and they respected that. So it was an exciting thing for me that I got to be a part of this.
Was it weird initially to be in that environment, or did it just feel exciting and natural?
Well, it was exciting, but it didn't feel weird to me, no. I felt like I was special. I felt like I was doing something for everybody, and that made me feel good. Now, I know that you're probably going to ask me how I feel about nuclear weapons then and what I think about it now. It hasn't changed. I just felt that I was helping my country, and that's exactly what we did.
Was that part of your motivation in taking the job initially, or was it more just that it was a good job and then?
No, it was not. No, it was a job, and it was a job that was exciting. And no, it wasn't that why I took this job. It was I needed a job, I needed money. But then once I got here, yeah, it was just, I went, wow, this is really big. I mean, this is just great that I'm a part of this. And I've always thought that, always.
Did you grow up with, what were your values growing up in terms of sort of patriotism and the military and stuff like that?
Well, my father was in World War II, and so I was brought up in a patriotic family that, yeah, you respected the flag and you respected to be an American, and you, so that part was never, there was never anything negative in my family about not defending your country. And so that part I fell right into. Yeah, I am. I'm helping all of America, all the world. Now, a lot of people, don't share that feeling, but I've never had a feeling that I was doing something wrong. And there have been, over the years, a lot of protesters. And in fact, one time, I can't even remember if it was in the 70s, that the protesters wanted to encircle the whole plant and hold hands. And I think they pretty much went pretty far. I don't think they made a whole circle, but anyway, I did not participate in that. But I did participate in, we had what they called a proactive rally for us. Maybe saying, you guys can protest against us, but we're going to protest for us. And it was held up on the corner of like 120 in Indiana. And they set up tents and had people speak, and bands were playing, and they gave out T-shirts, and I was a part of that. So that's how I felt.
How did you feel about the protesters? Were you angry at them? Did you think they were silly? What was your response to it?
No, I don't. It's a free country, and you can do whatever you want to do. Just don't impact me. Like beat on my car.
Did they beat on your car?
Well, there were a couple times that you'd drive through and they'd hit your car. And I don't think they meant like this. They just, wanted you to be aware that they were there. And they didn't really like what you were doing. But it didn't bother me. It was a free country.
Yeah.
So you can do whatever you want to do. Just don't impact me.
Do you ever meet with any of the protesters face to face or have any direct contact with them?
Actually, no. I mean, the closest I got to them was, driving through the gate. That was about it. Yeah, but no, I didn't talk to them. It wasn't a thing to do. I don't like confrontations.
Not many people do.
Yeah.
Some people do.
Well, some people do, but I sure don't. And like after the strike, the union strike, I mean, yeah, that was kind of a scary thing to come in and those people were yelling at you and you knew them. And I have to say that it ruined a lot of friendships when they came back.
Really?
Yes. Yes, it did.
Because there were bad things said or just that.
Well, and the fact that you were doing some of their job and they were trying to make a point, which I understood, but I wasn't a part of that. You know, I had a job and I needed to get to my job. So don't get in my way. But there were a lot of angry people and it wasn't a good time.
So was there an understanding that as management you weren't allowed to strike and weren't supported? And if you, I mean, did they expect you to walk off the job too, or?
They didn't want you to take their job when they're trying to make a point. Well, you know how unions work. I mean, for pay, for benefits, or whatever, I don't even remember what the issues were. I think those were it. And maybe safety had a little bit to do with their side, but I had a job to do and I didn't want to, you know, just don't get in my way. And they, you know, like I said, they thought we were doing their jobs and we were. Somebody had to. We couldn't go out and hire all these people. And so when they came back, it was the friendships either ended or were very strained. So.
Did some of those recover over the years?
And as time went by, yes,
Yeah.
they did. But you know that it was never forgotten.
Did you have any personal experience, you know, any personal friendships that were ruptured over the strike?
I didn't personally, but my husband worked here at the time. And my husband decided after like 6 weeks that he was going to come back to work.
Oh, he was union?
Yes. And he experienced some friendships that were ended.
What did he do out at the plant?
He worked in production.
And he didn't, he's not still?
No. He, in fact, he only worked out here for probably around 4 years. But it was at the time of the strike. And so he got involved in that more so than me.
So he initially struck and then?
Yes, he did.
And then why did he decide to go back to work?
Well, after about 6 weeks, we had bills to pay. And we weren't getting any union funds from them. So a lot of people came back, I think, because of that.
Nobody was getting union funds?
Maybe, it's been so long I can't really remember, but it wasn't a steady flow of money, no. No. And people had families and, you know, 6 weeks went by and, you know, we made the decision, you're going to have to go back to work. So for personal reasons, like I said, families, we had family and we had house payments, we had car payments, and the pay back then was, my husband might have made $3 an hour. So he decided, I didn't. It was his decision, and he decided, no, I am going to go back. So when, like I said, when the others came back after the 10th week, I think it was, yeah, it was bad. Those people were not happy with the ones that crossed the line. Yeah.
So
It can get nasty.
Would you drive into work with him in the mornings then?
Yes. And that's when the name calling and all that was done. And I just didn't like that time.
He must have felt.
He felt bad.
Yeah.
He felt really bad, but you know, it was his, he did what he had to do, and that's what he had to do. So, like I said, he lost a lot of friends.
Was that part of the reason he ended up leaving?
No, it wasn't. He ended up getting a better job at Coors, and he stayed there for like 28 years. And like today, he's retired already. Yeah. So he knows what it was like for me to work here because he worked here for 4 years. So whenever you talked about anything, he'd say, "Oh yeah, building 444. Yeah, I know where that is."
Good. Right. We're back on, and I think we were talking about your husband, and that he worked there. I actually was about to ask a question when your pager went off, which was, you still, even though you both had Q clearance, obviously, could you talk about your jobs?
No.
It's all need to know, right?
No, it was all on a need to know, and you respected that. No, you did not talk about anything together, other than plant-wide issues that the public knew. Yeah. And he liked working here. It's just that Coors was a better opportunity. And that was, fine with me. Because, I have worked here for so long, and people ask me, this is the only job you've ever had in your life? And I went, yeah. And I'm proud of that. And I'm proud of it because it's always been a good job for me. I've always been happy. I've always got good pay. The benefits are wonderful. I mean, back when I was hired, we didn't even know what co-pay meant. Never even heard of a co-pay because our benefits were so good. So therefore, I never had to go look for another job. This was very secure. And I'll tell you, if someone would have came up to me in the late 80s and said that we were going to stop production, I would have called him a liar. I just never thought this would happen. And it is. I mean, it is. So it's hard for people like myself to really, in your head, think of this place closing. But in the last 2 years, it's become real, it's a sure thing that this place is going away. So it's always just been a great place for me to work. And I've made some really, really close friends, still to this day.
How did you feel about the decision to close, and both for you and then in general for the plant?
Well, I think that the government knows what they're doing, and if we were too big, that's fine. I mean, that's their decision. I was sad at first when I heard that this place was going to close, but that's okay. The government can make that decision. And I'm at the right age to where it's not going to affect me because I have all the points. I have, it's not going to affect me. So it's up to me then to make the decision when to retire, and that's not right now. So I'll don't want to retire yet. But no, that's fine. If they want to close, that's fine. Yeah, it's okay with me. Okay. I guess I didn't have much of the deciding that anyway, so.
Yeah. That's true.
I just feel kind of bad for the people who say are like in their late 30s, early 40s, and maybe 10 years service. Those people are, they're going to have to go look for another job. Where, see, I don't have to do that. So hopefully they can place them, if they choose to do so, into maybe another DOE facility somewhere. So I hope, and it has happened. So a lot of people are going to Los Alamos and to Savannah River. So that's a good thing for them.
So I guess this all came about, we were talking about working in high security. Another thing I was interested in was the experience of having everything you do be classified, or much of what you do be classified, and having to deal with classification.
Mm-hmm.
Wondering what that experience was like.
Well, yeah. Since I've never worked anyplace else, I'm so used to it that working in a highly secured area didn't bother me. I mean, there was a lot of things that you had to go through as far as like going through guard shacks and having Every building that you went to was secure. It wasn't like you show your badge to one person and you've got, you can go anywhere. You couldn't. And in fact, the security badges at one point had numbers on them from like 1 to say 9. And if you were assigned a certain part of the plant, you would have that number on your badge and maybe say 2 areas. But even though you had a Q clearance, if you didn't have that number on your badge, you didn't get in. So they gave you the number that you needed to do your job. So that, was really secure. And not anybody that I know other than managers had all of the numbers to where they could go to all the buildings. But most employees like myself, we only had 2 or 3 numbers. So that was interesting. But no, it never bothered me, and security was always good out here. Yeah.
Since you started talking about the security checkpoints, I wonder if you could describe what it was like to work in those buildings. Again, I know this is your only job, so you never worked in a normal office building, but a typical day at work, I guess you probably worked in a lot of the different buildings, so a typical day was different. But
the only thing that was different to me is we all had our offices, just like anyone else, and the thing is that we had guards with guns at every door, and that didn't bother me at all. In fact, I told you it was exciting. So, and we were like a family. We all had the same mission. And that mission was to get the product out the door. And that's what we did, and we were good at it. We were good at it. So all of us worked really well together. I knew almost everybody on plant site. And it was just a good feeling that you were doing something, I thought, for everyone.
So you knew almost every 3,000 people.
Yeah, I did. Yeah. And those people, not anymore. I don't know them because, everybody's leaving, and over the past 5 years, say, the old folks have left. And it's like every day someone will come in and say goodbye. And that's been like the last 2 years. And it's kind of sad. But anyway, time goes on. And we must go on, so yeah.
So I imagine there was a lot of paperwork?
Lots of paperwork. Working for the government, there is a form for everything. So we had so many forms. We still do. But you got used to it. It was just the way we did business. That's the way it worked. So, yeah, we had a lot of forms.
And that must have, because with everything in triplicate and that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
and in fact, I'm going to date myself here. When I first started, of course, we had typewriters with carbon paper, and if you made a mistake and you had 6 copies, you either started over, or they had at the time, do you know what an X-Acto knife is? Okay, you could take your X-Acto knife, and you could try and clean up your copies with that little knife. But most of the time we would just start over. And you'd get to the end of a letter, say, and the letter had to be perfect. And you're just trying so hard not to make a mistake. And you get to the end and you make a mistake and you have to start over. But perfection, the upper management demanded perfection in everything. So that's how I learned the hard way. But that's okay. It was I learned from that, and it was okay. And I didn't really work for the upper management until the early 80s. And then when I was in that pool that I was telling you about, I got assigned to the president's office, and that's how that all materialized. And I only filled in. I didn't work. That wasn't my permanent job yet. But I think that got my foot in the door to when, in 1986, that's when they called me in, and that lady was leaving and asked if I would interview for that position. And I really wasn't sure I wanted that because I was working for the director of finance at the time. And he was a really good guy, and I liked my job. And I really didn't want to move because I'd only been there for about 4 months. But then I interviewed and I got that job, and the other lady moved on to bigger and better things. And that was an exciting time working in that office. And like I said, the upper management demanded a lot of things, but I became a better employee, I think, at that time, because you focused on things a little harder because you were in such high visibility, especially working with the DOE. I mean, you had to know what you were doing. And so it made me a better employee. And I also was there in the president's office when the FBI came in.
Yeah, I've been told to ask you about that.
Whoa. It was June 6th, 1989, and I got a phone call from the DOE manager's admin assistant and asked where my boss was. And I think he was in a meeting in another building, and she said, you need to find him and have him in my boss's office as soon as possible. So I did, found him. And he went to the DOE manager's office. And gee, an hour must have gone by. And then finally he came back to his office and he shut his door. And that seemed a little strange to me. Because, you know, he just wasn't like that. So he was in there, must have been for a couple of hours. And then finally he came out and he asked for me to get his direct reports together immediately. And we had an executive conference room in the building 111, which was considered the, that's where all of the directors and the high up managers were usually housed. So we went into this conference room, and that's when he informed all of them that he had just been served with a subpoena, or it's not a subpoena, what was it? Yeah, a search warrant. And that the directors were to disseminate to their people that the FBI was on plant site, and if they had authority to go in any building that they wanted, the employees, such as myself, was to cooperate fully, and whatever they ask for, you give them. Whatever they want, they can have. And it was a scary time for me because it was like I was in this dream. I couldn't believe that this was happening. And he told his directors that the search warrant, I guess they alleged that we as Rockwell, the prime contractor of this plant site, that we had violated some RCRA requirements and also the Clean Water Act. And it was like a slap in the face. I mean, we're going, what? And so anyway, it was exciting and scary at the same time. And so the meeting was over. And so my boss and me went back to our office, and that's when he told me that you must cooperate fully. And whatever they want, you give them. And the next thing I knew, I look up and there's 2 FBI agents standing in front of my desk. And it was a little intimidating because they had these jumpsuits on with FBI on the back, and they all had guns. And it was just scary because I'd never seen anybody with a gun other than our security officers. So it was a little intimidating to me. But they set up a command post, if you will, in our executive conference room in that building. And every day they would go from office to office and look through their files and actually set up a 24-hour copying operation to copy whatever they wanted. And I can't even tell you how many copies they must have made of things, but I think they were on plant site for about 3.5 weeks. And they were in my office a lot, every day. They even took I take shorthand, which is an old trade, but they took my old shorthand books. I just thought that was kind of strange because I told them, I hope you guys can read them because sometimes I can't read it either. But anyway, they took those and like I said, they copied almost everything in my office. And you'd walk down the hall and some offices had this yellow tape with black lettering that said crime scene, do not enter. And that was intimidating. So, but we cooperated and we did what we were told. And I believe I had nothing to hide. You can look anywhere you want. So that's how I felt about it.
Did you develop a relationship with any of the officers? You know, were they friendly? Were they?
Oh, they would say good morning and how are you today, but that's about it. No, I never struck up a conversation with them. And I mean, in my office, I had a pretty nice office, and I'd be at my desk, and there would be 3 officers sitting on the floor looking in my bottom drawers. So here you'd get up and you'd have to step over people.
And you're trying to do your
and
work.
I'm trying to do my work. But no, I didn't like carry on a conversation with them or anything. Mm-mm.
Do you feel that it was a mistake, the raid, or you know, what do you think the motivation was, and what do you think the outcome was?
You know, I don't really know all of the details, so I can't even speak to that. I can't even take what I have. It's whatever. Yeah, I don't really have I don't know politics,
Yeah.
and I'm not good at it, so.
Okay, so then after the raid, production was stopped.
Actually, Rockwell suspended operations at that point because they believed that if we were violating all of these things they said we were, they didn't want to do it anymore until they got to the bottom of it too. So they suspended operations. And in my own belief, I think that made Washington, D.C. angry that Rockwell did that. And the Rockwell really high up CEOs was summoned to Washington, D.C. to have a meeting with Admiral Watkins at the time. And in this meeting is when Rockwell and DOE came to the conclusion that Rockwell was no longer going to be the prime contractor. And I think they mutually agreed to that. I don't think they got fired. I don't think Rockwell quit. I think that they, in that high-level meeting, mutually agreed to, for them to give up this contract. And that was in probably October of '89. And then EG&G was going to be the next contractor, so a couple of their people were transferred to Rocky Flats, and they started to do transitioning of operations at that point in the late, because the last day that Rockwell had this plant was December 31st, 1989. And then EG&G came in January 1 of 1990. So that's how that worked.
So when did you leave the president's office?
At that time, EG&G felt that they needed to change out all of the higher level people, so to prove to DOE that the old thinking wouldn't still be there. And therefore I went back to employment and became a recruiter. And that's when, that was a good job too. That was really a good job, because that's when EG&G came in, and it was like we had an open checkbook to, get this place in order. And they started hiring a lot of people, and I was in the midst of that. And being a recruiter, I mean, I got to know everybody again that was being hired. So that was a great job also. But like I said, EG&G was then, and I was kind of out of what the no was then. But that was okay. It was a step beyond, and I was ready to go beyond anyway, so it just worked out.
So what did you think of EG&G as
Rockwell had it over them, hands down. It was just, I think they were just brought in for a short term. I didn't think that it was really ever going to be a long-term thing. And it just seemed like the management wasn't quite at the caliber as Rockwell had. But they did start production again, and but for a short period of time, because then they ceased production, I think, in 1992. So, and then I think they left in '94, and that's when Kaiser came in.
And how about Kaiser in comparison to Boulder?
Kaiser seemed to have that caliber back, and that was nice to see. But EG&G did one thing that was, in my opinion, good, and that was to give the employees AWS Friday. They made that into effect.
AWS?
It's called alternate work schedule, and what that is people work a full week, and then the next week you get that Friday off, because you work 4 9s and split that Friday in half. So that's your 40. And then your next week you carry the other 4 over, and you only work 9 with the Friday off. Well, if you want to motivate people, that's a good way. So that was a good thing, and we still have that today. And also, I think that was probably the only good thing they did. I wasn't real close to them, like I said, and I was just trying to focus on getting over this FBI thing and moving on to my next phase and hiring all those people, it was great. And I was the recruiter for the skilled craft people, which I can relate to very well. And so they're still here. I mean, they're doing D&D now. And that was a fun job. And I got to travel a little bit too, because EG&G had divisions in other states also, and they were trying to get Rocky Flats back online, and they were laying off in other divisions where they had Q clearances, such as Nevada. And so a few of us got to go down and hire all those Q clearance people if they were qualified, of course. And we needed alarm technicians at the time. So it was an exciting time too. So it's just been one thing after the other. And so now I work in the contractual part for the analytical laboratories. And that's a good job. So
what do you do? What is that?
So what I do is I'm what they call a contract technical representative, and I manage samples that are sent off-site. And I have certain labs that I'm assigned to. Most of my labs are on the East Coast. And what I do is follow those samples from the time they're sampled, paperwork-wise, until they're analyzed. If they're analyzed correctly, I have to make sure that the lab adheres to the contract that they signed with us. I pay the bills, that kind of thing. Very busy job. Yeah, and it's going to become busier because as D&D is happening, we have a lot of samples.
So these are the samples that are coming from?
Oh, say like the paint on the wall, the soil outside the door.
And it's every building, or is it just the ones that have contamination?
It's every building. Before they tear them down, they have to be sampled.
And that's to make sure that they are not?
That's right. That's absolutely right. And then, of course, we have the Colorado Department of Health that we have to adhere to their rules on the drinking water and the surface water, and I manage that. I also do all the air filtering for all the monitors around the buffer zone. We do all of those. I do a lot of just standard services, which means like you do, you give me some soil and we take it to the lab and we want to know what metals are in it. So we would have them analyzed for metals or for volatiles or for semi-volatiles, that kind of thing. And I do radiochemistry stuff also. So it's a really exciting job. I've learned a lot in the labs. And I used to work in building 559, and I worked there for 5.5 years until I took advantage of going to college on the reimbursement program, which was the best thing ever out here, in my opinion. And so I took advantage of that. And once I did receive my degree in business administration from Regis, the analytical laboratory manager decided that maybe being in the contract side of the lab would really fit my degree. And so they moved me from on the floor of the lab to the contracts to where I am today.
And what were you doing on the floor?
Well, what I did was I was the sample receiving person, which meant that I worked in the laboratory. That's where I had to dress out, and I had to be trained, just like the lab techs.
Wore coveralls and stuff?
Yes. And then what my main job was is to keep track of all of those samples that came into 559. And you had to be trained in the rad worker 2, and also the nuclear crit, all of that. So I've been through all of that, which I don't need to today because I won't go in there anymore. But I'm happy to say that I did experience that part also. So when people talk about it, I know exactly what they're talking about. So that was good. But this job is even better.
Okay, I'm going to stop.
Okay.
We're out of tape.
Okay.
And we were talking, sort of wrapping up your job history.
Yes.
I'll say again, this is Laura Johnson. It's the 17th of October, and we're in Building 60 at Rocky Flats in room 102. And we have the beautiful panorama of the Lindsay Ranch behind us to pretend we're outside, which is nice. Okay, you know, I did want to ask you, you mentioned this college reimbursement program, and I've never heard about that, so can you tell me a little bit about what it is?
Yes, and like I told you, it's the best thing other than the people that I believe that Rocky Flats has always offered their employees. And what happened is that when I was working in the president's office for Rockwell, he asked me one day, why aren't you taking advantage of that and go back to college? And it was like he hit me and slapped me in the face. And I drove home that night and I thought, he's right. What am I doing? Why haven't I taken advantage of this? And what it is they allow you, they meaning DOE, right, this program that they allow you, I think back at the time it was $5,000 for a year. And that back when would have covered it. But when I got into the program, they had diminished that to $2,500 a year. And going back to school in the 90s, you could go through that $2,500 really fast. So what I did was, it took me 7.5 years going to school at night. But so what I did was I would go through my $2,500 and then I would usually take a summer off, which would make me then at the end of the fiscal year, the new money would come in, and so then I would start up again because then they'd give me my next $2,500. But I have to tell you, I'm just so happy that I did that and that they allowed me to do that. And now today, they put me in this job that is exactly what I went to school for. And it's like perfect matchup. Yeah, yeah.
So is this program available to DOE employees or to contract? Was it specific to people working in the weapons production, or?
It was available for salaried employees of the prime contractor. That's all.
Only at Rocky Flats or at all the weapons facilities?
I don't know. I only knew about Rocky Flats. I didn't know about.
Did many people take advantage of it?
Yes. Yes, they did. Mm-hmm. And it's just the best thing that ever really happened to me. It made me more marketable, and perhaps I wouldn't be here today if that hadn't happened.
Do you feel like you, did you learn stuff you didn't know? I mean, could you have done your job without that degree? I mean,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I could have, but Kaiser Hill wants to diminish their population also, but they also wanted degreed people, and that made me a part of that. So if I didn't graduate, I probably would still be in 559 receiving samples, and my job would be going away the first of next year. So this one will carry me a little bit farther into the future also.
So this is the contracts with, said again,
For the analytical laboratory.
Receiving the samples.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so are you going to stay to the bitter end?
I will stay till the bitter end. And what the organization that I work in now, the contractual part of it, you can't like just close your door. Those contracts have to be closed out. which takes time. And I will be a part of that. So I think right now I will probably be here until May of '05. Not physically on the plant site per se. They could move us to another location. But I'm kind of looking around the middle of '05. And that would be okay with me. Since I was hired in '65, that'd give me 40 years.
So, and you'll have a pension from the contractors?
Well, actually, you know, since I told you I was hired by Dow, I worked for Rockwell, EG&G, and I now work for Kaiser. That all just rolls right in.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great. I will have a nice retirement. So see, it's always been a good place for me to work. No reason for me to go look for another job. And the people out here, they're great. It's always been great. And like I said, I've made some really dear friends that I still see today. There's a group of ladies that we still go to breakfast once every 2 months or so. Talk about old times and yeah.
Well, let me ask you. So I have this list of questions. We're closing in on
Okay.
the end, but we still have a few more questions. Since you just talked about your group of ladies, I was wondering what sort of issues the plant encountered when women came to work there in large numbers, I guess, in the production facility versus in clerical, and also what it was, I guess, what it was like for women before and after, you know, before there were large amounts of women and after.
You mean that went into production?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they had an apprenticeship program that people could sign up for, and that's when I saw that women were getting out of the clerical and administrative part of it, and the apprenticeship program would actually take women, minorities, and that kind of thing into it, and I think that's what really started. And then once they really started showing that, yeah, I can be a pipe fitter, or I can be an electrician, I can pass that. That's when it took just a few out of that apprenticeship program to start the ball rolling. And it just, every year you could just see more and more women go on over. And the reason being is because of pay. They have always paid well here.
Union jobs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And did you get a sense that there was much resistance to it?
A little bit in the beginning, because I think that the guys, it's always change, and they're not used to that. And well, nobody probably likes change, but I think some of them had a little resentment because maybe physically, if you're digging a ditch, maybe she couldn't last as long. She wasn't physically able to hold up her weight of the job. But I think that as years go by and women's lib did come around, I think that like today, it's no big deal. But in the beginning, yeah, I think it was. But I don't think there were really any issues over it.
You weren't really exposed to that?
I really wasn't exposed to that at that point, no. But I did know some of my friends that they got the apprenticeships, and for like these lab techs, I mean, they had to go through a lot of testing, and they had to know things. And those women, yeah, they did it, and they were good at it. Yeah, and I think that they proved themselves. And I think that's when the guy said, well, hey, guy, you know, she's good. I like working with her. So, yeah, it was probably in the early 70s is when I noticed it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've heard a few stories, and none of them have been on tape, unfortunately. It sounds like many of the conflicts were over clothing. Or not conflicts, but I've heard two stories. One was about the laundry and women being able to have their own clothes in the laundry,
well, they had to have additional clothing. yeah, but I don't remember that. I don't remember having an issue over that.
And And then I interviewed Jerry Haynes on.
Oh, Jerry,
Monday.
yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
he's a really nice man. And he was saying that this is again after we turned off the tape. He was just saying that up until I don't know, it was very recently, but sometime recently, all the women in the administrative side had to wear skirts.
We did. And wearing slacks, no way did we do that in the 60s. When I was hired, women wore their dresses, their suits, always nylons, heels. Yeah, no one wore slacks. But what I think I remember when this started to change, and that was the early 70s also. And we got a communications director in here who she was going to be even, equal, straight across the board. And she and a couple of other ladies started wearing pantsuits. And you probably weren't even born then, but they were all polyester and bell bottoms. And so she, in my opinion, she was the breakthrough to wear and convince the upper management that you guys wear suits, we can look just as nice as you can. It's just that, ours are going to be a little more fancier maybe or something. But she was the breakthrough. She was our communications director.
So was there a rule against it? Was it unspoken?
I don't know I think it was unspoken. It's just a thing that it was the right thing to do. I don't remember a rule telling me. There was a rule, I think, that you can't wear tennies and Levi's. But like today, look at us today. I mean, it's nothing to wear. Oh yeah, yeah. But I do remember in the Rockwell days that we had what you call a dress down Friday, and that's when you could wear your Levi's and tennies if you wanted to. But the women usually wore like what I have on today, just the slacks and a blouse. But that was in the 80s, is when we had that dress down Friday. And we all look forward to that. Hey, we don't have to wear nylons today. Yeah, that's great. But anyway, the reason I think that we dressed like that was because, I worked in Building 111 a lot, and there were a lot of high official people in that building. There was a lot of visibility. And at that time, the DOE offices were also in there. So, you didn't know who was going to come from Washington, who was going to come from Albuquerque. So you always wanted to look halfway decent and present yourself right.
So did you only dress in coveralls in the period when you were on the floor of the sampling lab?
Well, what you do is they have what they call anti-seize, and it's like pajamas. You've seen, maybe you haven't seen them. They look like the same clothing that hospital people wear. You've seen them.
Scrubs, yeah.
Scrubs, yeah. And so what you do is that you put those on first, and then you put your coveralls over that. And then you put booties on, and your gloves, and your safety glasses, that kind of thing.
And you had to go through, you had to shower on your way out? Both ways?
No, what you did was you had to doff your clothing at what they call a step-off pad, and that's where you had certain rules and regulations of, you were trained of how to do that, and then the laundry was right there at the step-off pad, and so you undressed there, but you left your scrubs on, and then you would go through long ago, an RCT would be there to monitor you out. But as time and money went away, you went through what they call a PCM2, and it was a machine that you got into to measure your body for anything if you had anything on you. And so you were trained to do that. And then once the machine cleared you, then you walked through an airlock, and then you walked to your locker room, and then you showered, and then put on your street clothes.
And so by the time you did that, there were separate showers for men and women?
Oh yes. Yeah. No, we didn't. The women had their own locker room, and the men had theirs. Yeah.
Were you ever exposed to anything concerning?
No, I never was. And I didn't, well, there was one incident that when not me per se, but the laboratory, they moved a file cabinet and contaminated a room once, but I didn't happen to be there at the time. But I mean, these people that work there are so well trained that everybody knows exactly what to do, when, where. You're trained through all alarms. When you hear certain things, you know exactly what to do, where to go. It is not a scary thing.
So alarms in your building, and if someone gets there's some contamination, there's a certain kind of alarm that goes.
Yes, and there's trained people knowing what to do. RCTs are right there, who are very well trained. Working in those kind of conditions did not bother me one bit. And the reason being is because of the training. Everybody was trained thoroughly, and that meant a lot to everybody. And you want the guy next to you trained also.
Right.
And we all, and the training wasn't easy. The training was hard, and they put you through scenarios that you better know what you're doing. So I never had a problem with that. People in the lab that I worked in, I could depend on those people. They knew exactly what to do.
Do you have any friends who were exposed to solvents or?
You mean like, you better turn it on. They're just going to tell us the fire alarm system's on or something. Come on,
first?
come on.
May I have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? ISS will be doing hydrant testing. You may see fluctuation in water pressure. They will be testing by building 116. Thank you for your attention. End of announcement. 11:31.
Are these announcements ready? Are these announcements new?
No,
They've always had announcements.
we've always had plant, announcements. You have to.
And is that was that announcement plant-wide?
Yes. Every building out there heard just what we heard.
Okay. But sometimes they'll have announcements that are just building-wide.
It's like if you're going to have they're going to test your alarms in your building, it would only be for that building. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so you're saying that, I was asking if you had any friends who were exposed to, or colleagues, or, any interesting stories of people who had frightening exposures to beryllium or solvents or.
No, I don't have any. No. I mean, there were times when you might, in the lab, get a little bit on your trouser or something like that, but it would detect that. And so what would happen is an RCT would come and he would take you, there's a room there, a decontamination room. He would put you in there and just give you a new pair of pants. Or if you got it on your face or something like that, RCT would take care of that. And then, and then they would take you to medical.
That never happened to you?
Never happened to me. No, never happened to me.
Okay, we're almost done with this page. Oh, another question I wanted to ask is you mentioned women and minorities coming in around the same time. What was the atmosphere like for minorities coming in?
It was, I never noticed that, there was anything that was an issue. We've always had minorities ever since I've been here, and everybody, no, that's not a non-issue that I think. I've never seen any repercussions from that, no.
Okay. And finally, before I move on to the next page, what are your recollections of the 1969 fire?
Boy, I can't really speak much about that other than I think it happened in May, and I think it was a weekend. And I came in on Monday, And I heard about, well, we heard about it on the news. And so Monday when we came to work, people were busy. And actually, a lot of college students were hired for that summer to help with the decontamination. And it was a 24-hour thing. But the college kids wanted to do that because it was good money. Because, you know, they had to go in, you had to have a full face supplied air suit on.
And they had to have Q clearance, I assume.
Actually, I'm not sure that they queued them. I think that, you know, I can't remember. Maybe you're right. I can't remember. But they hired, gee, it must have taken them really a couple of years to really clean up to where they wanted it to be. And I think they must have gone through 600 people to do that. But I personally did not get involved in that. My bosses did, but I didn't.
And any other sort of watershed events in the plant's history that?
Just the raid, and that was the scariest moment of my life out here. Yeah, that was a scary day. But
it's over.
But it's over.
Public has a sense that Rocky Flats was a very dangerous place to work. You sort of answered this in talking about how you trusted your coworkers, but did you ever feel this was so, and did your perception about the safety issue change over time in any way?
No, I was never afraid of, I always believed that our standards out here were always stricter than, say, an industrial place. Because our standards had to be at this level. Theirs might be at this level. So those standards, these are okay, but ours were better, and we met them. And that's why I was never, our standards, we lived up to them. And so no, I never felt in danger, ever, out here.
How did you feel about the way safety issues were talked about in the media?
Over the years, you mean? Well, I think that it's become, they've made it more aware to the public, say in the last 15 years than when I began. There was always safety here. There had to be safety. But I think that it was just made more aware of, to the people, more programs were put in place. And there's always been, the union has always been a strong advocate of safety. I mean, that's one of their issues, and to protect their employees. And I think that the company and the union have always shared that with safety, because there's always been, safety has always been in the forefront of the goal out here. And so they even have a program, which is an old program. It's called the Joint Union Company Safety Committee. And that committee is dedicated to making and solving safety issues. And I always thought that that was a good thing. And those people reported to the president. I mean, that's how high level that they felt it was. And as you go into the buildings, there's always safety concern forms that you can fill out. And it's always been there for the people. And they can fill it right out there, send it to the committee, and they'll investigate. So it's, I think it's always been a #1 priority.
What about health care for people with, continuing health care for people who had exposures and other?
You know, I don't know anybody personally, but I know that the DOE has people working on, say, health care cases, but I don't know the outcome of that. But I do know that they look into everything. I mean, They have an office here today that they have people that do just that, and look at all the people that have had problems. Now, whether they get compensated, I think, for the borreliosis though program, I do know that they do call those people in and give them medical checkups, probably once or twice a year. So I think that that's a good thing. And
okay, well, I think we're looking at, you've already answered a lot of these questions.
have I?
Yeah. You've already said, you talked about the best things about working at Rocky Flats.
Was the people.
Yeah.
And then the reimbursement tuition program for my college, and it was, I was pretty old when I graduated, and but I'm so proud of the fact that that someone allowed me to do that. Yeah, and I took advantage of it. It was a good move, and that was good.
What about the most difficult or worst things about working at Rocky Flats?
The worst thing, boy, that's a hard one, because I've always been happy. I guess the worst thing that I can say at this point is the wind. The wind has always been bad out here, always. And it seems like it's calmed down maybe in the last 10 years, but when I first started working out here, we had what you call the buddy system. And it was 100 miles an hour, 110, gusts up too. And so your buddy system is that you and your buddy hang on to each other when you went to the parking lot to get in your car at night, or when you went to work, yes.
That was established by the contractors, or was that just sort of?
It was by the prime contractor, yeah. It was an idea that somebody came up with, because people were getting blown down and getting scraped up and hitting their head or scraped their knee or whatever, and then they had to deal with that. So somebody came up with, let's do the buddy system, and I think that it helped. It really helped. So grab your buddy, we're going to the car.
So would you go out holding hands?
Yes, yes. It was. Actually, it still blows pretty hard out here. And there was a lady in my organization just this past March, and she got blown down, and she hit her head and scraped her knees. And so we brought her in and called the medical, and they came and got her and observed her for a little while. But it's just, the wind is just a bad thing out here.
It just topples you right over.
It does. It's just, it's horrible.
Have you ever gotten blown down?
I haven't, but almost. Almost. But that's about the worst thing that I can think of is the wind. Yeah, it's even blowing today, if you noticed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been windy last couple of days.
Mhm.
Warm front.
Yeah.
Well, any other events, stories, or anything else that you'd like to share?
The only thing that I can say is that the 38 years I've been here, it's been good for me, good for my family, and I've thoroughly enjoyed my stay.
So you have kids?
I have 2 daughters.
Are they grown?
Yes, I have one daughter that is 26, and she's a psychology major. She works for a behavioral intervention company in Denver. And I have an older daughter that's 27. She's a computer science major, and she works for Lockheed Martin. And so neither one of them are married. They just have their jobs and their animals, and they, over all these years that Mom has worked here, they have never been afraid for me, other than when September 11th happened. And I remember getting a phone call from my little daughter and saying, "Why are you still at work? What are you doing?" And I go, "What are you talking about?" Because I hadn't been informed yet, because my office was in the lab. And you don't have TVs and radios in there. And she told me about it, and she said, "You need to go home, Mom." But that was the only time that I can remember them even being concerned. So they used to get teased at school sometimes, saying, you know, do you glow in the dark? Because your mom works there. Things like that, but it was all in fun. Yeah.
So were you the first member of your family to go to college? You said your mom was a teacher, so.
No, my mom wasn't a teacher. No,
Oh.
no, my kids went to college,
Oh, right.
but no, I was the first one in my family to. Well, as I can't say that. My kids graduated from college, and so did I have two older sisters, and their kids graduated from college. So,
You were the
but I was
first
the.
of your generation.
That's right, I was.
And it was just not something, when you went to work at Rocky Flats, that was just not something that was considered?
It wasn't considered. I kind of wanted to, but yet I was really anxious to get going in life, and I wanted a car, and I wanted a house, and that kind of thing. And college, it wasn't kind of a mandatory thing back then, and like it is today. So no, I didn't consider that. I just wanted to get going. And then when my manager told me that, I had already worked here 20 years, and that's when he said, you need to take advantage of this. And I'm glad I listened to him. So that was a good thing.
And you did not meet your husband at the plant?
No,
You met
I
him
didn't.
before.
Yeah, I met him before. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's all. I'm going to turn off the tape now. Thank you very much for participating in this great interview.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad that I was involved in this little project.